When a man goes quiet, it's not always confusion, it's clarity. Silence from a man speaks louder than any argument, any excuse, any explanation. When he stops explaining himself, stops trying to convince you, stops responding with emotion, that silence is his decision. It means he has already played every scenario in his head and the choice has been made. You see, men don't just wake up one morning and go cold. They think, they observe, they test. And when they stop talking, it's because they've seen enough. His silence isn't uncertainty, it's finality wrapped in calm. When a man truly cares, you'll never have to chase his words or wonder what's going on in his heart. He'll show up, he'll communicate, he'll make it clear where you stand. But when he pulls back, when he gets quiet, that's not confusion, that's him withdrawing his emotional investment. It's not a game, it's not manipulation, it's the moment he stops fighting for what he once believed in. Silence is his boundary, his closure, his peace. Because men don't always announce when they're done. They don't always argue when something's over. Sometimes they simply go quiet and let that silence do all the talking. It's hard to accept that quiet can mean goodbye. Most people think if they just explain a little more, plead a little longer, things might change. But once a man decides in silence, nothing you say will change his mind. Because that decision wasn't made out of anger, it was made out of realization. He realized what he deserves. He realized where he's not being valued. He realized that peace is better than confusion. And that's when he checks out quietly, respectfully, but completely. Silence isn't weakness, it's strength under control. It's the man's way of saying, I don't need to prove anything anymore. When he goes quiet, it's because he's already had the conversation with himself and he's done explaining it to anyone else. The loudest message he'll ever send is the one wrapped in silence, because that's when he's made peace with the truth and he no longer needs your validation. So when you notice that shift, when the texts slow down, when the calls stop, when his words fade, don't chase the noise. Pay attention to the silence, because in that silence, you'll find the answer, not the one you want to hear, but the one you need to understand. A man's silence doesn't mean he's lost interest for no reason. It means he's found clarity. It means he's already decided where you fit in his life. And now he's simply choosing peace over chaos, truth over confusion, and distance over disappointment. A man's silence often signals a final decision, not confusion. This is something that many people fail to recognize because we are conditioned to believe that silence always means uncertainty or hesitation. But in reality, when a man goes quiet, it is rarely a sign that he doesn't know what he wants. More often, it is the exact opposite. Silence is a reflection of clarity, a signal that he has already thought through every possibility, every scenario, and every outcome. He has analyzed the situation in his mind, weighed the pros and cons, and reached a conclusion about where you stand in his life. While women are often socialized to express their feelings, communicate openly, and seek confirmation through conversation, many men operate differently. They internalize their thought process, and instead of talking through their decisions, they sit with them. They observe, reflect, and ultimately choose to respond or not respond based on that reflection. When he stops speaking, when he stops texting, when he stops trying to explain himself, it is because he has already made up his mind. He knows what he wants, he knows what he doesn't want, and he doesn't feel the need to continue convincing anyone of his intentions. It's a quiet but firm way of drawing boundaries and asserting control over his own life and emotions. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is a message. It is a way of showing that the decision has been reached and that further discussion is unnecessary. While it might be painful to interpret this silence, it is important to recognize that it is honest. It is not manipulative, it is not a game, and it is not designed to confuse you. It is the clearest form of communication a man can give when he has reached a conclusion. Understanding this requires letting go of the expectation that every action must be accompanied by words. Actions and inactions alike carry meaning. The way he interacts or doesn't interact with you is telling. If he was still uncertain, you would see some movement, some effort to clarify, some desire to explain. The absence of these things is what confirms his decision. And while society often tells us that men are emotionally distant or unexpressive, this perspective reframes silence as purposeful, intentional, and revealing. It shows that the choice has been made and now it is up to the other person to recognize it. This awareness allows a woman to stop chasing, stop pleading, and stop overanalyzing behaviors that are already set in stone. It also encourages a deeper understanding of emotional intelligence, showing that sometimes the loudest messages are delivered without a single word. Silence carries weight because it comes from a place of certainty. It comes from reflection, observation, and ultimately decision. It is a man's way of signaling that he has assessed the situation fully and that the answer is already determined. For anyone on the receiving end, it is a moment to pause, to reflect, and to recognize the truth that lies behind the quiet, understanding that it speaks volumes without needing to be spoken aloud. When he stops explaining, it means he's seen enough. There is a tendency to misinterpret a man's withdrawal from conversation as uncertainty, confusion, or even a temporary emotional lapse, but the truth is far more deliberate. When a man decides to stop explaining himself, it is rarely an accident. It is a conscious choice that comes after a period of observation, reflection, and mental processing. Men often assess situations internally before voicing their thoughts, weighing their feelings, expectations, and boundaries before taking action. The moment he stops explaining is the moment he has reached a threshold, a point at which further discussion is unnecessary because he has already determined his perspective. This silence is not passive. It is active communication in its purest form. By no longer offering explanations, he is signaling that he has made a judgment about the situation, about the relationship, and about the role you play in his life. It is a quiet declaration that he has decided what he is willing to accept, what he values, and what he is unwilling to compromise. While some may interpret this as coldness or indifference, it is actually a display of emotional clarity and decisiveness. A man who continues to explain himself is still negotiating, still uncertain, still seeking alignment or validation. But when he stops, it is because he no longer feels the need to justify his stance to anyone else, and that is a powerful indicator of his decision. The cessation of explanations is also a boundary-setting mechanism. It is his way of asserting that his thoughts, decisions, and feelings are settled, and that further debate or persuasion is unwelcome. He has seen enough to make a conclusion, and now he chooses silence over unnecessary conflict or emotional exhaustion. This can be difficult for the other person to accept because silence is often uncomfortable. We are social creatures trained to fill voids with words, but in this case, the absence of words carries far more meaning than any argument ever could. Understanding that stopping explanations is not about punishment or disinterest, but about finality changes the way one interprets his actions. It encourages a mindset that respects the quiet as communication rather than dismissing it as neglect. Recognizing this pattern allows a woman to stop chasing answers that have already been decided. It allows her to honor the truth of the situation without projecting uncertainty where there is none. This silence is deliberate, and it reflects a man's internal resolution. It shows that he has fully evaluated his feelings, the circumstances, and the people involved, and has reached a conclusion that aligns with his values and priorities. When a man ceases to explain, it is his way of signaling that the assessment is complete and that the choice is made, leaving no room for further negotiation or reinterpretation. For anyone observing this behavior, it is a moment to pause and truly consider the weight of what is unspoken, recognizing that the end of explanations is the start of a clear and unchangeable decision. Silence is his form of closure and emotional withdrawal. It's important to understand that when a man becomes quiet, it is not always about you or something you did wrong. Often it is about him processing what he feels, what he needs, and ultimately what he is willing to give. Emotional withdrawal is not an absence of feeling, it is a deliberate act of self preservation, reflection, and decision making. Men, unlike women who often process emotions through conversation and sharing, tend to internalize their experiences. When a man reaches the point of silence, it is because he has evaluated the situation thoroughly, weighed his feelings, and decided that words are no longer necessary. Silence becomes his way of signaling boundaries and asserting control over his emotional space. Emotional withdrawal does not happen overnight. It is preceded by observation, consideration, and reflection. He notices patterns, behaviors, and inconsistencies, and eventually he makes an internal decision about what he will tolerate and what he will not. Once that decision is made, he stops engaging in emotional labor that no longer serves him. This is where silence comes in as a powerful form of communication. By withdrawing emotionally, he is sending a message that is clear to those who can read it. The relationship, the connection, or the dynamic has reached a limit, and he has chosen to step back. For someone on the receiving end, it can feel like abandonment or rejection, but it is really a man's way of protecting his energy and aligning his actions with his truth. Emotional withdrawal paired with silence is not manipulative. It is purposeful. It communicates that he has already assessed the situation and that further discussion will not change his conclusion. This type of behavior reflects maturity and self-awareness, showing that he values clarity over confusion and peace over chaos. Many people struggle with this because it contrasts with the idea that love or care must always be demonstrated through words and constant interaction. In reality, sometimes the loudest expressions of intention come through quietness and distance. Silence paired with withdrawal is his way of defining his boundaries and maintaining them without creating unnecessary conflict. It forces the other person to recognize the reality of the situation without verbal argument or dramatic displays. Understanding this requires a shift in perspective, seeing silence not as an absence but as a presence, not as emptiness but as a statement. Emotional withdrawal is a protective mechanism, and when combined with quiet, it becomes a sign that a man has made a conscious choice about where he stands. His actions or lack thereof speak volumes, and those who pay attention will see that this is a moment of clarity, not confusion. Recognizing the meaning behind this behavior allows one to step back, reflect, and understand that silence is not a temporary phase, but a deliberate expression of finality, boundaries, and emotional resolution. Once he chooses peace over chaos, he won't argue or explain. This is a crucial truth to understand about men and their decision-making process. Often people assume that silence or withdrawal indicates indecision, that there is still room for negotiation or persuasion. But the reality is different. When a man decides that peace is more valuable than chaos, he is making a conscious choice to remove himself from conflict, drama, or situations that drain his energy unnecessarily. He has assessed the emotional landscape, considered the impact of continued arguments, and determined that the path forward is one of calm and clarity rather than constant struggle. Choosing peace over chaos is not about avoidance, it is about prioritization. It is about recognizing what truly matters and what is worth investing energy into. A man who has reached this point understands that life is too short to waste on constant tension, misunderstandings, and repeated emotional confrontations. He has likely experienced the stress, confusion, and exhaustion that come from trying to explain, justify, or negotiate feelings that are either ignored or misunderstood. At some point, he reaches a threshold where the effort required to argue or explain is no longer worth the emotional cost. This is when he steps back, withdraws, and embraces silence as a form of communication. His quietness is not passive, it is active, intentional, and meaningful. It shows that he has decided what is worth his attention and what is not, and he is unwilling to expend energy on situations that disrupt his inner peace. In relationships, this behavior can be misinterpreted as disinterest or indifference, but in truth, it reflects emotional intelligence and self respect. When a man chooses peace over chaos, he no longer feels compelled to justify his feelings or defend his decisions. He has already processed everything internally and determined that further discussion will not change the outcome. This is a powerful form of communication because it signals that the decision is final without the need for confrontation or verbal debate. It forces the other person to recognize the boundaries and understand the importance of respect and personal space. Understanding this dynamic helps to shift perspective from seeing silence as rejection to seeing it as a declaration of inner clarity. It is a man's way of saying that he values his peace and emotional stability above unnecessary conflict and that his decisions are not up for debate. Once he has made this choice, chasing explanations or arguments becomes irrelevant because the answer has already been determined. This approach allows him to maintain dignity, avoid unnecessary drama, and focus on what truly matters to him. His calm, deliberate quietness carries more meaning than any words ever could, and it reflects a deeper understanding of self and the value of emotional equilibrium. Recognizing this allows others to stop overanalyzing, to respect the boundaries he has set, and to appreciate the clarity that comes from someone who has consciously chosen peace over chaos. His quiet reflects clarity, not weakness or hesitation. Many people misunderstand silence, assuming that when a man goes quiet, it is because he is unsure, insecure, or incapable of expressing his feelings. In reality, quietness often comes from a place of strength, understanding, and intentional decision making. A man who is truly certain about his feelings and his choices does not always need to verbalize them continuously. Words can be unnecessary when the mind and heart have already reached clarity. Silence, in this sense, is a reflection of his internal alignment, a sign that he has evaluated the situation fully, understood his emotions, and decided on the path forward. It is not a signal of weakness, nor is it hesitation. It is a demonstration of self awareness and control. Men often process life differently than women, taking time to think, reflect, and assess before taking action. When he is quiet, it does not mean he is incapable of communication. It means he has already communicated in ways that are meaningful to him, and he sees no further need to over-explain or justify his position. This quietness is often misunderstood because society tends to equate emotion and communication with constant verbal expression. However, someone who has clarity does not require constant affirmation because they are certain of their decisions and the reasoning behind them. Silence, in this context, carries weight because it shows that he has processed the information, observed the behaviors, and reached a conclusion. It is purposeful and deliberate. Moreover, his quietness signals confidence and composure. A man who knows his mind and his heart does not need to argue to convince others, nor does he need to seek validation through words. He understands the value of his emotional energy, and by choosing silence, he is preserving that energy for what truly matters. This clarity also extends to his interactions and relationships. When he is quiet, he is often testing the dynamics, observing patterns, and determining who aligns with his values and intentions. It is a reflective process, not an indecisive one. Quietness is his way of communicating without words, of setting boundaries without confrontation, and of asserting his decisions without debate. It is a mature approach that reflects understanding, patience, and discernment. Recognizing this perspective allows one to see silence for what it truly is, a manifestation of certainty and inner strength. It encourages a shift away from assuming that lack of verbal expression equals disinterest or uncertainty. Instead, it highlights that a man's calm, quiet demeanor can signify decisiveness, intentionality, and emotional clarity. His silence is a powerful statement because it reveals that he has reached a conclusion and that he is aligned with his choices internally. Those who pay attention to these subtleties can learn to interpret his quiet not as hesitation, but as a clear, confident, and unwavering expression of where he stands. When communication fades, the decision has already been made. This is one of the most important truths to understand about human behavior, especially in relationships. Many people believe that silence indicates uncertainty, that if someone stops talking, it must mean they are unsure or confused. But in reality, the fading of communication is rarely about hesitation. It is a clear sign that a person has processed their thoughts and feelings and has reached a conclusion about what they want, who they want, and how they feel about the relationship. Communication is a tool, a means of connection, and when it begins to fade, it signals that the tool is no longer necessary because the decision has already been internally established. A man in particular often processes internally rather than externally. He observes, reflects, and considers the dynamics at play. He weighs his emotions, his priorities, and his boundaries. Once he has done this, he knows where he stands, and the need for verbal or constant communication diminishes. The fading of communication is not a passive occurrence. It is intentional. It reflects the mental and emotional work he has done to assess the situation and the people involved. It is not about ignoring or punishing. It is about alignment with his own clarity. When a man stops explaining, stops texting, or stops engaging in ways that used to require effort, it is because he has already